How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good buddy out there on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing, man?
Doing well, breathing in a sweet smell of victory after the Steelers beat the Giants last night. So very, very pleased that getting to go into the Steelers bye week, get to enjoy a restful time of being 6-2 and leading the AFC North. How are you doing right now, Jack?
I'm doing good. I would commend you for the glory that you get to bask in. However, you beat both of the New York teams these last 2 weeks. So, granted, feel a heck of a lot worse if you lost to them, but they are the two teams that play at MetLife Stadium. But no, I'm doing well. It's a good, nice Tuesday night here in Central Texas, and just happy that we're able to find the time now to hop on here and talk some NFL. It's actually been kind of a wild week. Obviously, we're approaching the trade deadline with each week that comes. I think it's next Tuesday, right? Do I have that right? Yeah. We should. I mean, there have been some moves that have happened already. Mostly in the wide receiver market has been booming a lot. One move in particular today, but some other stuff. But as the week goes on, and especially after this next weekend, as teams play, I imagine we'll see a lot more of these trades kind of trickle in here. But outside of trades, there's been some other stuff happening too. Injuries, guys being tired. The drill. So let's start though down in Houston, down here in my neck of the woods right now. Stephon Diggs has a torn ACL and is done for the year. We found that out today. It didn't look good on Sunday. I mean, obviously, it didn't look awful. It's not like he got hit in a weird way or anything. But when a guy goes down and is struggling to walk with a non-contact injury, you always sort of go ACL or Achilles. And it was the ACL for him. So, Nick, the Texans, who, by the way, are 5-2, and they're I mean, record wise they look good, but they are not beating teams the way that you'd expect them to. Lot of close wins, and their losses have not been pretty. So what do you think? I mean, what do you think the Texans do from here now that they've gotten significantly weaker at their wide receiver spot?
So first off, I feel like part of the Texans' struggle is that their offensive line has not been protecting their quarterback, CJ Stroud, anywhere near as well as they were last year.
Yeah.
And last year, I have a very vivid memory about my Steelers playing the Texans last year, very early in the season. And I was looking at it. They had two backup offensive tackles in that week. And I thought TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith are going to take their lunch money. They're about to get 7 sacks this game each. They're just going to blow up this game. In that game, CJ Stroud blew out the Steelers and just annihilated them that week with a lot of quick throws, very decisive. Offensive line protected well. And it seemed like the offensive line with a bunch of backups and played up to competition, and the Steelers played down a good bit to an injured offensive line. And it seems like the Texans' offensive line has not been able to replicate that schematic and effort kind of level they were able to last year. And with Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard, Shaq Mason, it feels like they're healthier and somehow noticeably worse this year on the offensive line.
Mm-hmm.
And really, the wide receiver injuries now piling up. It could really be a struggle the next couple of weeks as far as fielding really high-end receiving game. But at the start of the year, the Texans, I think, probably had the deepest receiving room in the whole league. Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, Tank Dell, Xavier Hutchinson, Robert Woods, John Mechie, Steven Sims. Like, you got 7-8 dudes who can all get at least a couple hundred yards. Nico Collins, Stephon Diggs, and Tank Dell. Like, those are all dudes who easily could get 1,000 yards, if not more, in a given season. I think Dell, obviously, we haven't seen it, but he's very talented.
Yeah.
I just feel like they're going to have to start relying on this depth. Somebody like a John Mechie, who was drafted in the second round, obviously overcame cancer, and like little ups to him for doing that. But like Now you're going to have to go from a great story to a really contributing high-end player. And in the past, he's been a healthy scratch.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have to scratch off some of these lotto tickets for the Texans to see what they have. And with Stephon Diggs out and Nico Collins, I don't know what his status is as far as how long he's going to be out. But this could be rough sledding for a couple of weeks for a Texans team that hasn't been replicating last year quite as well as we thought they could.
Sure. Yeah. As of a week ago, Nico Collins has not experienced any setbacks. Should be able to return by I think it said November 10th. November 10th would be the first time that he's able to be reinstated from the injured reserve. But still, I mean, that is now, a weaker room. I feel like most of the wide receivers that were on the market have been traded at this point. So it's sort of interesting. What do you do if you're a team that's looking for a receiver? Obviously, Mike Williams is still on the market, will likely get moved. There's always the thought of Jacoby Myers might be available. But outside of those two, it's hard to look and see what you have. Makes you think, okay, well, who isn't playing that we could call? Like do the Texans go, you know what? Let's sign Chase Claypool to the practice squad and see what we got. Like it might not hurt to do something like that. So it'll be really interesting to see what the Texans do. I have a lot of faith in CJ Stroud as long as he has time in the pocket that he'll be able to make it work with whatever receivers he's got. I think we really saw that last year. Not that he didn't have good weapons. He had great weapons last year. A lot of these young guys like Collins and Dell, who were around last year, but he made them look good last year. And so I think if like you said, if the offensive line can pick it up, then I think he'll be in a good position to work it out with what he has, but also, we talked about before we started recording, like this is the time of year that contenders are making deals and teams that are like don't really believe they're contenders or like, hey, we're ahead of schedule in terms of being contenders with our 3 or 4 year plan. We're not going to make any moves right now. This is the time for the Texans to go, all right, you know what? Are we contenders right now? Like, do we see the windows open? And if so, we got to do something. So we'll see what happens with them. Staying in the AFC South, we had an extremely odd situation on Sunday in the same game between the Texans and the Colts. I think it was the third quarter. I believe that the Colts were driving. I think they weren't quite in the red zone, but were down on the Texas side of the field. Big third down coming out. Remember, the final score of that game was Houston 23, Indianapolis 20. So big third down, chance to continue the drive. If you're the Colts, hopefully score a touchdown. I'm pretty sure they ended up kicking a field goal on this drive. And so if you think about it that way, they score 4 more points. They win the game 24-23. But, there's a lot of what could have been in football, so we won't go that far. But that being said, on a play before a third down, Anthony Richardson taps the helmet. The universal, hey, I need a blow. You rarely see a quarterback do that, if you've ever seen a quarterback do that. But especially a quarterback isn't going to do that unless they're injured or like, hey, you know what? I just got hit and I'm feeling weird. At the time, I think that's what a lot of us thought. That's what I thought. And I actually commended him for doing that and walking off the field because I feel like now in the NFL, it doesn't matter what happens. You just go down on the ground and lay there. Even if you're like 2 feet from your sideline, it's like, really, like you can't just like roll a couple times and go to the sideline so we can keep playing. So I was like, cool, that's good. Hopefully everything's okay. He gets looked at and everything. We come to find out he's perfectly fine. He has no injury. He's not hurt at all. He feels good. He was just, to quote Anthony Richardson, I'm not going to lie to you, I was tired. Took himself out of the game because he was tired. Your quarterback, your future of the franchise quarterback decides I'm going to take myself out because I'm tired. I think that if the Colts win this game and he completes 70% of his passes, throws for 270 and a couple touchdowns, then this is like, wow, that was weird. Okay, whatever. But I'm pretty sure his stat line for Sunday, and maybe it didn't end this way, but at one point it was 10 for 24. I think he had one touchdown, but also 2 picks, I believe. Um, and on top of it, he's just been bad. He has just not been a good quarterback. When it comes to the starting quarterbacks, I think we're looking at like Gardner Minshew, Spencer Rattler, and Jacoby Brissett right now are like the guys that are still playing that are worse than him. Deshaun Watson is hurt. Obviously, he would be down there too. But still, I mean, he is at the bottom of the barrel right now when it comes to quarterbacks in the NFL. And just sort of like, what do the Colts do with him at this point?
The thing is, you and I can both look at it as outside observers, as purely fans and commentators at this point. But obviously, he was quite raw coming out of college, came out with very, very few college starts, and everybody knew he was basically going to be a project.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the onus on this, the situation, obviously, the microcosm of it is like this quarterback, like he's out of breath and calling for himself to be out of the game. And for him, I look at it as either one of two ways. Like, is he just like not tough enough? Because like I've never seen a quarterback just be like, oh, pull me out. Whereas like you'll see quarterbacks like a Matt Stafford, like a Phillip Rivers be like, I'm finishing this game no matter what. I've got a torn ACL, but I'm still finishing this game. I've got a separated shoulder. Put me in. I'm going to throw this damn ball. And Anthony Richardson, like, oh, I'm tired. Just like, let me go over there and chill on the bench for a little bit. Like, are we looking at this as a lack of toughness? Or are we looking at this through the lens of like a immature, like, you're the quarterback. You have to be able to be face of the franchise and be the guy setting the example. And either you're not working hard enough to where your cardio isn't good enough to be able to be out on the field, or like you got to push through this to be able to like set an example, or like you got to be able to word salad your way through an interview and like not just be like, I'll tell you the truth. I was tired.
Right.
And so I'm like, are we questioning his toughness, his maturity, all of the above? I just feel like I land on the immaturity more than anything, because he's a freak athlete and I don't know why he wouldn't be a really tough player. But this was just a really strange situation that I think you could look at through a variety of angles. Where do you land on it, Jack?
Yeah, so it's hard. I feel like with Anthony Richardson, there are two conversations to have. One, there is this situation with him tapping out and saying that he was tired. That's just really weird. Like, I don't even know how to really like put into words like how I feel about that, because it's so foreign, right? That a quarterback would do that. You know, you see defensive linemen and linebackers do that, but also in the NFL, like those are deep rooms that like they're subbing guys in and out a lot just because of that, because of, you know, the time in the trenches and everything like that. Really, really easy to do that as a position by committee type thing. But I mean, if you're the quarterback, like you're that dude. You're the guy that if he goes down, like when he goes down and gets hurt, you know, everybody in the place, you know, stops and holds their breath. Right? You're not in a position where it's like, oh, well, just have Joe Flacco come in for this play. Like, it'll be fine. You know, like that's not how it works. And so I definitely think that there's a lot of this that is immaturity. Frankly, and you can attest to this, I was not high on him coming out of college. I just really struggle with guys that don't have experience. And I think he started like, I don't know, like 13 or 14 games throughout his entire time at college. Only one full season as a starter. It actually might be less because I'm pretty sure he got hurt during his his final year there at Florida. But it was he makes some of the craziest highlights, and also he struggles with some of the simplest things. And so I thought there was a lot of immaturity with him, and like, yes, oh, there's so much raw talent. He's such a freak athlete. It's like, yeah, but like, you know what? Chad Powers can throw a 5-yard out, like,
Right.
and there's an aspect to that. And so I think that kind of ties into the second half of the conversation, or the other conversation to have, which is like, what do the Colts do with Anthony Richardson in terms of like, listen, your progression just isn't there, right? Like you look at his stats for this year so far. His highest completion percentage in a game that he threw at least 10 passes is 50%. He was 75% against Pittsburgh, but he only threw 4 passes because he got hurt. You look at week 1 against Houston, 9 of 19. Week 2 against Green Bay, 17 of 34. Week 3 against Chicago, 10 of 20. Week 4, week 5. Actually, he was out for a couple weeks. He comes back against Miami, 10 of 24. Then this last week, 10 of 32. Like, it doesn't matter how freak of an athlete you are. It doesn't matter that you can throw 60 yards down the field off your back foot when when you're in an offense, right? This isn't Madden. This isn't like flag football, right? That it's like, let's just go out there and have fun, and we're not even going to call a play. Guys are just going to run out there and we're going to throw a ball to an open guy. Like, the offense in Indianapolis looks so bad because of him, but it's because things are so choppy because he's not able to do the basic things like, hey, I've got a guy running a 3-yard crosser and I throw it way over his head. Or, hey, I've got a guy running a hitch route and I throw it so far behind him that the guy covering the hitch route just to the right of him is picking it off. Like, it's just it's not good. And yeah, I'm concerned that Anthony Richardson might go down as like the biggest bust that we've seen. And I say that because there has been no sign of improvement. He's still making the same mistakes. On top of that, we have this new really weird immaturity issue. We haven't seen steps forward. And I I said this to you before we started, and I was half joking, but like, the more that I've thought about it, the more that I think it would actually be like a great way for him to save his career. Is what if he filled a Taysom Hill type role, but a Taysom Hill type role that like he's on the field like for 80% of the offensive snaps instead of 20% like Taysom Hill is, right? Like, he is a freak athlete. He is a strong runner. I know that it wouldn't be hard for him to, develop and change his regimen to become a better, have more longevity, in his legs, right? But then imagine what you can do, how defenses need to prepare. Like, hey, this is that guy that can throw the ball 60 yards down the field at running back, right? Like think about that. Think about the crazy wrinkles that could get put into that offense. Obviously the Colts can't do that right now, right? Like, he was he was a rookie last year. They used the 4th overall pick on him. But I think about how Tim Tebow really wasn't willing to pivot, and took too long for him to be like, oh, Urban Meyer's a coach of the Jaguars. Yeah, let me go play tight end for them. If I think Anthony Richardson can save his career someday by making a change, making a pivot like that. And I think it would be really fun to watch. I don't think it will happen, but I think it would be really cool.
I like the Taysom Hill like role for Anthony Richardson in theory, but I feel like my mind kind of goes to like, well, they have Jonathan Taylor as a stud running back, so you're not playing him at full-time running back, obviously.
Right.
But also like at fullback, like the size and physicality, like that makes sense. But Richardson has also proven to be insanely frail in terms of like, he's gotten injured many times in his 2-year career.
Yeah.
And that would really concern me in terms of like, he's getting injured playing quarterback, and quarterbacks are more protected than they've ever been before. So imagine him trying to play like fullback or like move tight end or something. Like I think he could just like absolutely blow up his shoulder, or like ruin a knee or something like that on a chop block, whatever. So I'd be really worried about that. But I think what I 100% agree with you with is the moment you said they drafted him number 4. And I think the fact that the Colts and Chris Ballard drafted him number 4, that when you have an ego like a GM, owner, coach, team, and quarterback of drafting somebody that high, that everybody has this kind of ego of we need to make it work the way we planned on doing it and the way we wanted to do it.
Yeah.
And it's well, maybe the way you planned on doing it turned out to not be the best way. And I'd be really, really I'm just pretty sure that no team would ever like pull like a Terrell Pryor. Like Terrell Pryor played quarterback and then became 1,000-yard receiver on the Browns, which in its own right's unbelievable. But like Lamar Jackson, people asked to like, will you transition and try out as a receiver when he was coming out of college? But a number 4 overall pick at quarterback, still on his first team, assuming like he could go to other teams obviously later in his career, depending on how things go. But like, man, I just don't think at this point in time there's any way that the Colts can salvage it by doing anything else other than let him develop as a quarterback. Like the only way out of it for the Colts, I think, is like bench him and let him sit behind Flacco for a half a year or a year, or like kind of put training wheels on the offense. Like you gotta slow play it if you want to fix him, but like it's either do that or sell him. Like are you trying to trade him now, or are you trying to go like full on like bench him and play out Flacco and kind of let him just chill there? Like I don't know what the way out from here is, because he has not proven to be a stable at all quarterback.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, the Colts have said that they're benching him. Who knows how long it's going to last? The other thing is like, what's his trade value at this point? You know, like the fact is that the Steelers gave up a bag of chips for Justin Fields, and Justin Fields showed promise and had talent and had good tape outside of like, oh, here are 4 explosive plays. Anthony Richardson doesn't even have that. Like, and being a first round pick, lottery pick quarterback, like if you're the Colts and let's say you decided, yeah, we're going to trade him, you're probably hoping at best like a 5th or a 6th round pick, and you're probably taking on a good chunk of his contract, which then at that point it's like, well, why trade him? But also, what choice do we have? I think the way it's probably going to play out is they're not going to pick up his 5th year. Maybe they'll franchise tag him, but they might not even do that. I mean, again, that's a couple of years down the line, and you know, there's a chance that we can see some growth there. But yeah, it's hard to see a world where Anthony Richardson finds a way to turn this around and turn it around well enough that, you know, like we're eating our words right a couple of years from now. So, moving on, I teased it a little bit. We did have another wide receiver get traded today, and that was Deontay Johnson is traded to the Baltimore Ravens. The Ravens come off of a rather shocking loss on Sunday to Cleveland, to Jameis Winston and the Cleveland Browns. For the first time all year, the Browns offense looked incredible. Jameis Winston threw for over 300 yards. That's the first time that I think first time all year they've had a quarterback throw for over 200 yards. If if I heard that stat correctly, that might not. I'm, you know, go yeah, Dick, go look that up.
Yeah,
I may have botched that one. But yeah, it was the first time their offense looked anything like an actual offense. Jameis Winston might save Kevin Stefanski's job, which is just crazy to think about. But the Ravens, they had some drop issues in that game. Some that were just like, dude, that's a drop. Like, what are you doing? Others that were like weird, like in the fourth quarter, Bateman lost one in the sun. Or at least when he dropped it, he pointed up like, the sun was in my eye. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but that happened. And so the Ravens go and they go out and get a wide receiver, and they get Deontay Johnson from the Panthers. And Nick, my first thought when I saw this was cool. So the Ravens went and traded for old Zay Flowers to pair with real Zay Flowers and worst draft pick Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman. I mean, like how do you see this? Does this move the needle for the Ravens? I mean, even when I look at him, he's a guy that also is not consistent with not dropping the ball. So like, it's not even like you went and got a sure-handed guy either. I don't know. Tell me what I'm missing.
Right. I 100% agree with you. Being a Deontay Johnson supporter, former Steeler, of course, now was on the Panthers this year. He obviously has a diva factor. He's a former Steelers receiver. They all have diva factors. Like, we know how to draft a diva receiver, a very talented one, but diva nonetheless. Deontay Johnson is a very talented route runner who has quickness to pair with that. But the thing is, the route running nature, like he can get open in a phone booth. He can get open as far as like on a 5 to 10 yard route on anybody seemingly. But his hands are inconsistent. His attitude can be inconsistent. He's not a blocking receiver whatsoever, really. So on quarterback runs or running to the outside with Derrick Henry, he's not going to be somebody who you really want to be running behind to make that crucial key block. And he also has a tendency in some ways to like catches the ball and tries to crack a big play by running backwards to like go all the way around everybody rather than like get the extra yard just kind of diving forward.
Sure.
And so I would 100% agree that it's kind of more of the same where like, hey, if you're looking at a team of a bunch of small, quick dudes who like all of them can get open at all three levels, all of them are good route runners, all of them have a bit of a diva factor, and all of them are liable to drop a big pass at a random time and kind of look like fools in like a big game. Like it's a lot more of the same, as you said. But I do think that he is talented. He does add something as far as another guy you have to cover. And so like if a Zay Flowers or what's the other receiver? Rashad Bateman out of Minnesota. If either of them got injured, like it would really help, but it's just kind of more of the same. It's kind of adding water to more water. But I think that there are obviously other teams we're aware of now who have received injuries. Like Johnson, say for example, on the Texans with Diggs out would have made a lot of sense now that we know that Diggs has a torn ACL. The Steelers, obviously, like it seems like the relationship was fractured there. But Deontay Johnson could fill a role on the Steelers. And obviously, there are other teams that would need receiving help. Somebody like a 49ers with Ayuk out for the year, Deontay Johnson would make sense there. It feels like the Ravens got him, kept him away from other teams, and like that in and of its own merit, especially for the price. It's a very cheap price they got him for. I think it was just a late pick swap. Yep. And so I think that it was a good trade by the Ravens. The contract isn't big or anything like that. So I think it's a good trade for them. The Panthers are the Panthers. They're in full rebuild and have not really much to look forward to. So
I feel like the thing that I struggle with this deal is, like you said, it's not like you have Zay Flowers and Rashad Bateman and you're like, let's go get like a big receiver, right? A big contested ball deep down the field guy, like a D-Hop, right? It's or what we remember D-Hop to be. It's not like you're going and getting that. And the other thing that like I really don't understand with this is the offense isn't the Ravens' problem. It's their defense, which I know is hard to believe because it's the Ravens. Part of me wonders if like they're struggling to believe that because they're the Ravens and, all the way back to when Rex Ryan was the DC there, like they were just always had a defense that you couldn't you couldn't do what you wanted against. That was the Ravens calling card. It's the reason that Joe Flacco was able to win a Super Bowl with them, right? Like, not because he wasn't a good quarterback, he absolutely was, especially during that year, but he's not a world beater. He's not a guy that you're going to go put the game on his back at the quarterback position, right? And so my struggle with this deal for them is like, you need to go get defense help, right? Like, you need to help your secondary right now. Your secondary does not look good. I mean, Kyle Hamilton looks great. He dropped what would have been a game-winning interception on Sunday.
That was a terrible drop. That was awful. Like,
it was a terrible throw. It was like the only like really, really bad throw that Jameis had like all game, and it could have been the most catastrophic, and he just literally dropped it. Like, I mean, it was like in his breadbasket too, like, and it just fell through his hands.
Yeah.
So like the defense is where the Ravens are struggling right now. I mean, their defense nearly let the Dallas Cowboys come back and win against them, right? In week 3.
Yep.
You know,
Lost
they
to
just
the Raiders.
they lost to the Raiders. Yeah, so it's weird to me. I feel like it's a trade that, you know, like, I guess you could say, oh, well, you went and made a move so that someone else in the AFC didn't. I guess the way I see it, like, the best example of that is the Bills going and getting Amari Cooper, which actually adds a new wrinkle to their offense, where getting Deontay Johnson doesn't add a new wrinkle to your offense. Obviously, he's a guy you're familiar with as the Ravens because you saw him twice a year for the entirety of his career at Pittsburgh. And so, like, you also should know his pitfalls. So, I don't know. It just feels weird to me. It feels like, hey, other teams are trading for people. We got it. We should do that too, right? Yeah. Let's go get a receiver because that's what all of these good teams in the AFC are doing. So I don't know. It just it doesn't move the needle for me. It doesn't make them worse. Again, they didn't give up much. Honestly, if you're the Panthers, I'm surprised you traded him for that. Like, you're trying to rebuild. I get he's a loner, but like, what help does that give you? Like, I think it was like a 5th or 6th round pick swap. Like, oh yeah, good. Let's get this guy off our books and go get a guy that would have been a free agent after this year anyway and wouldn't have been on your books. And let's go get some draft stock that you really didn't gain. So that was just Panthers being the Panthers, I feel like, and it doesn't move the needle for me. When it comes to the broader picture of the AFC, which is the weaker conference, but, you know, Lamar can't beat Patrick Mahomes. He's done it once, but like, real, you know, that's he just really struggles with that, and this isn't something that helps get the Ravens over that hump.
I hear you. I feel like they traded for the wrong dude on the Panthers. That's somebody who apparently the Panthers have been turning down trades from. J.C. Horn at corner, like, Marlon Humphreys has been injured for the Ravens, like, adding a young, talented, injury-prone, but very talented former first-round corner. I think that potentially in that system could be a huge get for them, and they just decided to add more of the same to more of the same on an offense that didn't really need it. So I agree with you there.
Yeah. So having talked about that trade, and let's kind of move into more trade talk here. We are about halfway through the season. The trade deadline is next Tuesday, and teams have really sort of separated themselves. You know, who are the contenders? Who are teams that are going to be buying? Who are teams that are completely out of it and are going to be selling? And we could talk about that. We talked about it a little bit here over the last couple weeks, but one thing that we haven't talked about is there's a difference between, you know what, this year isn't our year, and so we're going to be sellers and we're going to just kind of shell off a few pieces, or teams that it's like, you know what, it's time to go into a full rebuild. And there are a lot of teams that are in that right now. But Nick, to sort of start this, I want to talk about a few teams that, you know, I think you and I would both agree are teams that should go full rebuild right now. But also it's like, it's hard to see that. Not just hard to see that, but surprising considering all of the expectations and high hopes for that team this year. There are a few obvious ones, a couple others that would be interesting to talk about. But I mean, let's start with the obvious ones of teams that had high hopes, high potential, and set their floor lower than we thought it would be this year. And not only is that bad enough that they should sell right now, but even that they should go full rebuild. And let's start in the AFC East with the Miami Dolphins. I know they just paid Tua. They've got Tyreek Hill. They just paid Jalen Waddle. It seems like they're always dealing with the injury bug, which hurts them. But at the same time, like, even when they aren't super injured, they can't win a playoff game. They struggle on the road in December and in January, especially being the only team in the South in the AFC East. And basically every November and December, you're going to New York and Buffalo and New England. Like, it's something that they struggle with, especially Tua. And so, like, I think the Dolphins, I think it's time to realize, look, we had our window and we just don't have it anymore. What do you think?
Mm-hmm. I completely agree with you. I've never been a Tua Tagovailoa believer. And obviously they had a great year last year in terms of the offense dropping the 70 bomb on the Broncos. Just such efficient offense for basically the whole regular season. And such a fast team. Obviously that's their calling card. But A-Chain's super fast. Mostert, even in his old age. Drafted Jalen Wright. Jeff Wilson's quick too. Hill, Waddle, OBJ, just Malik Washington, D. Eskridge. Like, they just got super quick dudes on offense. Such a fast team. And I feel like we saw them get slowed down in the snow last year and in the cold against Kansas City. And that Tua has historically frozen up in the cold. And this fast team just clearly, like, we saw the formula break down in an AFC that has a bunch of teams that play in the cold. And Tua can't do that. Like, this team, we saw them try it last year. It looked like it worked until it didn't. And they've got a lot of guys now that I feel like you could look at being obvious dudes who they should be selling. Like, Tyreek Hill is still a superstar, obviously. But Hill, the moment that Tua was out, fell off the map in terms of, he had a 67-yard game, I think. But besides that, like, just terrible offensive games by Hill. Their offensive line's nothing special. Teron Armstead, very old at left tackle. Calais Campbell, Emmanuel Ogbah on the defensive line. Brooks, Kendall Fuller, Jalen Ramsey. These are all older dudes that, like, aren't the highest level, biggest contract dudes. But these are dudes that, like, you're on a team that, like, has no shot at making the playoffs this year. And you could be selling a lot of these players for third, fourth, fifth round picks that you could kind of start building up your team. That the moment they got injured last year at the edge rusher position, their defense fell off. And the moment their offense went into the cold, their offense fell off. And that team just clearly wasn't sustainable for a big window.
Yeah. I mean, I'm looking at what they've got right now, and if you look at players' cap hit right now, you look at guys that seem cheap, but then you go over and you look at, hey, what's their dead cap like, right? And that's where things are like, I mean, you've got some guys that are taking up a lot of money there. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Like, I think they could easily get a third, maybe even a second round pick for Tyreek Hill, because he's just still that dude, and especially looking at these teams that it seems like this year wide receiver is the place that these teams want to upgrade before the trade deadline. I think he's a really, really high piece that you could get a lot for. Teron Armstead, like, he's old, but I would imagine that the Kansas City Chiefs would absolutely be willing to trade for him, considering their issues at the tackle position. There are other teams that are having, the Texans have traded with the Dolphins for offensive tackles before, with Laramie Tunzel. Like, that could be a guy to move. Obviously, moving Tua in the middle of the season would be shocking, one, but two, just really, really difficult. So that wouldn't happen. But maybe in the offseason you're taking calls, seeing what you can get for him. Who else? I mean, Jalen Waddle, you just signed and he's young, so I'd imagine you'd want to keep him. But yeah, I mean, Jalen Ramsey is one of them. You mentioned Kendall Fuller. Like some of these defensive guys that are old, your defense is bad and hurt anyway. I mean, as a Lions fan, I would absolutely trade for Jalen Ramsey, right? Like,
Right.
there are teams that would. A lot of teams that would. And so I think unlike some of these other teams that we're about to talk about, like the Dolphins actually have the most pieces that they could move and get high return for to actually set up what would feel like a rather quick rebuild, as opposed to some of these other teams that we're going to get to that are kind of in cap hell, don't have many trade pieces, don't have many picks because they traded them to get some of their guys as well. So yeah, I really think the Dolphins should go full rebuild. If they want to rebuild around Tua, then okay. I don't think that would be the best call. But also you just paid him, so you're kind of stuck at the same time. So
Right. I will say I thought about this earlier today. The Steelers obviously have been sniffing around for wide receiver help. The whole league knows they've been looking for wide receivers. Many wide receivers are off the market now. So many have been traded. If the Steelers in the shadows could like a second for Tyreek Hill with this Russell Wilson down the field offense to pair with George Pickens, a down the field bombs away power run into a deep bomb offense, that would be a terrifying offense. And
yeah.
I'd happily part with a second to see that right now. Definitely, 100%.
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, and I mean, we talked about Teron Armstead where he might be able to go, and Jalen Ramsey. But I mean, there are other guys here too that have some juice, right? Have enough juice that they they'd be worth moving on from, and teams would be worth getting too. Let's move on to the New York Jets, another team with really, really high hopes. Nick, you had them in the playoffs, I think, as a wild card, right? Was where you had them?
I had them as 5 seed, I think, like top of the wild card, which they are not right now. Clearly.
Yeah, I was not believing. I was not believing in the hype. Personally, I was just like, we just have to see it, and we haven't seen it, and it's not like we will see it, because what have they done? They fired their head coach, hasn't gotten any better. They went and traded for Devontae Adams, hasn't gotten any better. They changed who's calling plays, hasn't gotten any better. The fact is, when Aaron Rodgers was traded for, I think a lot of us and the Jets thought, hey, we're getting the back-to-back MVP Aaron Rodgers, and forgetting that his last year in Green Bay was so bad. I think a lot of that was like, oh, well, like he has young receivers, but it wasn't all that. I watched both of the games that he played against the Lions, and that was the start of Dan Campbell turning things around, the year that they went 8-9, and he didn't look good in either of those games, including his last game at Lambeau, right?
So Joseph to lose the game, right? Is that
I think he threw 2 picks in that game and threw 3 picks in the game in Detroit. Just not good. But anyway, I think the problem is a lot of us wanted to forget about that and think, oh well, that was just the fluke. When in reality, I think that's just kind of what he's become. And it's hard, I mean, I was never a really big Aaron Rodgers fan, but I mean, he was like my childhood, was one of the quarterbacks in my childhood. We lost Brady recently, and I say that sounded like, he died, right? He retired. Brady retired before him. The Mannings retired. Phillip Rivers is retired. Matt Ryan has retired. Big Ben is retired, and so like, it feels like he's kind of the last of those, like, hey, these were the quarterbacks that were doing awesome things in my childhood. So it's hard to admit it, but the fact is, so much of what was going to be the success for this New York Jets team, both last year and this year, was predicated on Aaron Rodgers being not even great, just being good, right? Because this Jets defense was supposed to be so good that if the Jets only score 18 points, average 18 points a game, they'll be able to win a lot of games. Fact is, the defense is not as good as everybody was talking like it was. I mean, I remember during Hard Knocks, I guess it was last year that they were on Hard Knocks, and it was like comparisons to the 85 Bears, and all this. It's like this defense looks so bad. And even the times that it looks decent or good enough that if you were able to score 24 points, then you'd be okay. Aaron Rodgers hasn't been able to get it done. The fact is the offense looks just as bad, if not worse, than when Zach Wilson was playing quarterback for them last year. And the numbers back that up too. So I think it's time for the Jets to just full rebuild, be like, you know what, we tried this. It didn't work. Mike Greenberg, big Jets fan, has even said this was the worst sort of plan of events that we've seen in football, or the highest hopes with the worst actual reality of what happened. And so I think the Jets need to rebuild. Unlike the Dolphins, I feel like they don't have as many good pieces. But Nick, sort of, what are your thoughts here with the Jets?
I kind of feel like this Jets team is kind of where the Broncos were 2.5 years ago, where like this Broncos team is like the roster, I think, is pretty dang good. Where the defense, I think, players wise, is pretty good. And the offense, players wise, if you just look at it on a sheet of paper, it looks good to me. But the issue is ownership, bad. Coaching, bad. Quarterback play, bad. And so the totality of the roster, I think, makes people think, oh, yeah, this team's so talented, they're going to win. But the fact of the matter is, talent is kind of overrated in the NFL, where coaching, motivation, structure, leadership all matter so much more in a team sport where you've got 53-man rosters and practice squads and full-on coaching staffs, where like I feel like this Jets team is kind of like, say, for example, the Vikings, where like the Vikings, they lost their rookie quarterback this year and Sam Darnold came in and played well. But the big separator to me is that Vikings team is talented, but head coach, really smart, really great play caller. Defensive coordinator, really smart, really great defensive play caller. And ownership has been stable. And so I feel like if you just gave that head coach, that defensive coordinator, that ownership to the Jets, that they'd be very, very good, even with Aaron Rodgers, that structure would take that talent to absolute new heights. And that's what I kind of feel like was lacking from the Jets experiment. So I feel like we're just kind of seeing in real time that talent doesn't always win clearly in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, I look at their roster. They're really old, man. Like they're not young bucks. I think the guy that you keep if you're the Jets, because he's been so loyal and so good for you, that you try to build around would be Quinnen Williams. But I mean, like Alan Lazard is taking up so much of your money, and you brought him over just because Aaron Rodgers wanted him. And, I think you just finally need to say, you know what, Aaron, this didn't work. And whatever you go to do after this year, Godspeed to you. We're not bringing you back. We're moving on. And because of that, we're also moving on from the guys that you made us bring here. So obviously that means Nathaniel Hackett, which will happen regardless, because they're going to get a new coach and no way are they going to keep Nathaniel Hackett on. But also Alan Lazard, just, go ahead, get rid of him. I know you just got Hassan Reddick, but I mean, their team's looking for edge rushers.
He's on a 1-year deal too. He's a mercenary right now.
Right. I would absolutely field calls. I don't want the Lions to trade for him, but if he was available, I'm sure Brad Holmes would call. Other guys like DJ Reed. DJ Reed is not playing up to his contract. And I mean, he's playing well. I don't think he's playing well enough that you're like, you know what, it's worth us to keep him and keep paying him this much when we're trying to rebuild. So I think move on from him. Like I said, Lazard, Reddick. Obviously, you're going to keep Sauce Gardner and you're going to keep Garrett Wilson. But there are other guys. C.J. Mosley, right? Would be a piece that teams would want. Um, this will sound crazy, but if you decide right now, you know what, we are done and we are rebuilding, then you put Devontae Adams back on the trade market.
Yeah, 100%.
Like we got him for these 2 games. It didn't work. We're not bringing Aaron Rodgers back. He's probably going to want to leave and go to New Orleans to be with Derek Carr if he's not going to be with Aaron Rodgers. And so this didn't work. So you know what? Let's trade him. Let's trade him right now. Let's try and cut our losses and get what we can back from him. And yeah, I think the Jets, I think it's over. I was skeptical of this from the beginning because it was just one of those, like, this could work out incredibly, but also like we just have to see it. And I think we all thought that Aaron Rodgers getting plugged in with this Jets team was going to be just like when Brady got plugged in with Tampa Bay and took them from, the low of the low to the high of the high. But one, I think the Brady that showed up in Tampa was better than the Rodgers that showed up in New York. Mm-hmm. 2, Brady cared so much that he was like breaking the law during COVID to meet with his receivers when Aaron Rodgers during mandatory minicamp is going to Egypt, right? Like it's, okay, if he was at mandatory minicamp, I wouldn't even bring that up because it's like, listen, Brady was a freak and he went that extra mile. But there's a difference between this is the baseline, Brady went to here, Rodgers went down to here, right? Like that makes that separation really, really large in that direction. So I think obviously, like, Jets fans, rightfully so, want Woody Johnson to sell the team, and I don't blame them. But yeah, this is just not good.
Right. I agree with you that they should be sellers as far as some of these assets. If you were to look in your crystal ball, though, right now, how do you think this free agency goes as far as, like, what does Aaron Rodgers do after this season? Do you see him fading off into retirement? Do you see him sticking it out one more year with the Jets? Do you see him another team? Do you see him cut? Do you see him traded? Like, I feel like every door in a way is open right now.
Yeah. I think he's not technically, I think he has like voided money that gets paid out over the next 5 years, but he's not I don't think he's under contract with the team after this year. Do I have that right?
No, one more year. He has one more year under contract, but it's cheap, like 25 million next year, which for a quarterback's very cheap.
So
but
yeah,
he's not.
I would definitely urge him to retire. I think there's a chance that he does. I don't know if he actually will, but I think there's a chance that he does. If not, I don't know what his trade value is, right? Like he just hasn't looked good. Has looked very on Aaron Rodgers, so I don't know what you get back if you try to trade him. Maybe you do just cut him. And if you cut him, then you're also sort of being like, listen, Aaron, maybe you have a conversation like, Aaron, listen, we're going to cut you unless you retire. Now, if you don't want the embarrassment of getting cut, totally understand. Go ahead and retire, and that'll be that. That's what I would do. But who knows? Maybe Woody Johnson is like, absolutely not. You're not doing that to my boy. But yeah, I don't see how you trade him and really get assets there. Because I don't know who would want to trade for him, right? Like maybe it could be similar to like when the Jets traded for Brett Favre back in the day, but like even still, what are you?
Yeah, the one that jumped to mind for me right now actually could be like the Colts. Like after this year, the Flacco ride is over. Could Aaron Rodgers be like the Flacco to Anthony Richardson next year, where like you're kind of riding between them, and that's a good offensive line and good receivers and a good defense? Like I feel like that would be the like weird coach is good, but offense is really talented, but the offensive line's already established. Like I feel like that kind of makes sense because like the Flacco role in the whole situation.
Yeah.
But like Aaron Rodgers, I think right now can be considered almost a negative asset where like if you tried to trade him right now, I'm like, do you get back a seventh and you give up a sixth with him? Like
Right.
I don't know who he's necessarily a benefit to right now in the league.
Right.
Like maybe the Colts is who came to mind for me. But
Yeah.
like he's not playing well. Aaron Rodgers isn't playing well at all. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It's weird. I just don't see any team that would want him. This is not like, Kirk Cousins playing on the franchise tag a couple times in Washington and then, having suitors and Minnesota being that suitor. Like Rodgers is old. He isn't very good anymore. The teams that like need a quarterback are like, no, we want a quarterback for the future, not just a guy for 1 year. Um, so yeah, I mean, maybe the Colts with that role, but like you said, the Jets are also giving up stuff to get to trade him there. Um, so yeah, I don't know. Moving on, let's go one more of these teams that should go full rebuild that had really really high hopes for this season, but have really really fallen below them. And that is the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns came into this year. They made it to the playoffs last year with quarterback by committee. It's like in baseball when you win a bullpen game that your starter goes 3 innings and then you just keep throwing different pitchers out there. That's how it was for these Browns last year. Obviously, they kind of settled in on Joe Flacco. They're towards the end, who got him to the playoffs. But still, Browns was like, man, you get Deshaun healthy, that team is going to be great. The defense is the best in the league. They've got great receivers, obviously great running back, and they had a good running game even after Chubb was out and got hurt last year. The Browns were sort of like some people's dark horse to even go and challenge the Chiefs for the AFC. And here they are sitting at 2-6, 8 games into the season. They were 1-6 before this last week, where they stunned the Ravens, and Jameis Winston played great. So the thing that I feel like the Browns need to ask themselves, and I feel like we should ask, is do the Browns decide to rebuild? Or do they think, no, now that we have Jameis, we can still be competitors in the AFC this year, in a weak AFC? Or do they decide, listen, we've dug ourselves too much of a hole this year, but this last week showed us that we can still be competitive, and so instead of blowing it up, we should make a few moves, our guys that would be, that we can trade off as loaners and get, some third, fourth, and fifth round picks for. Let's do that. But we're gonna plan to come back strong next year.
They do seem like they're in a weird spot. First off, shout out to dude I was super high on in the draft, second-year receiver Cedric Tillman. Back-to-back 100-yard games, touchdown in both of them. Baller out of Tennessee, played second fiddle in a way to Jalen Hyatt on that Tennessee team, a bit due to injury. But like, he's been a stud the last 2 games, played very well, and really balled out and put the nail in the coffin against the Ravens. The Browns, though, the anchor of the Deshaun Watson contract is a huge factor in where their whole franchise is at. Jameis has obviously balled out. I think, though, that at this point in time where they dug themselves into this very deep hole in terms of win-loss record, that I feel like this is going to be the linchpin week of like some of these teams we're talking about, of the like Jets or the Browns or the Dolphins. Like, a couple of these teams are going to win this week, and that one win is going to propel them into, okay, we think we can win. We think we can sneak into that 7th seed. Like, can we run the table? Mm-hmm. And one of these teams is going to get embarrassed, and somebody could get fired, and then that could propel them into a full rebuild. And so I feel like a terrible Jameis game with like 3 interceptions could be the the kind of linchpin of a bunch of these assets being traded, of like a Zadarius Smith, a Juan Thornhill, a Shelby Harris, players like that who could be very useful on other teams as role-playing, playmaking kind of defensive players. I feel like you could see this be kind of the turning point week of the like team that wins decides to not be a seller last minute, team that loses finally decides to sell. Yeah. So I feel like what happened with the Rams. The Rams were ready, it seems like, to hit the button on Cooper Kupp. They were calling teams to trade Cooper Kupp. Mm-hmm. And Cooper Kupp
was calling about Matt Stafford.
Yep. Yeah. And Minnesota was calling about Matt Stafford. But the moment they won that, was it the Thursday night game or was it the Monday night? It was
Thursday against Minnesota.
Thursday against Minnesota. They beat Sam Darnold. And immediately it's like, well, we're not trading Cooper Kupp now. No, we're not trading Matt Stafford. They feel like they have a chance. They feel like our offense is healthy now. We're going to be really good. And so I feel like if they had lost that game, if Cooper Kupp didn't come back and play really well that game, maybe they're still completely thinking about trading him. But I feel like just that one game can switch the perception. So I feel like we're going to see something like that happen this weekend. And so we can't really predict like exactly who, but like looking at the slate, we'll be able to kind of figure it out. And after Sunday, we'll know. So
right. Yeah. I mean, looking at those three teams, the Jets play on Thursday. They host Houston. The Dolphins play the Bills, and the Browns play the Chargers. And so when you look at that, the one that, seems the most likely, hey, this team's going to win this one, and maybe string a couple together that they're like, hold on now, definitely looks like Cleveland.
I'd agree.
But I could see a world where they win that game. And because outside of the Deshaun Watson move, I do feel like management at Cleveland has actually been pretty smart as of late. The management that tried to trade Joe Hayden didn't get anything, and so they cut him, is no longer there. So the management that is there, I feel like actually has been doing a pretty good job. So I could see them sort of doing we're not going to put all of our eggs in one basket type thing. And they win, and they're like, okay, we're not blowing it up, right? But here are a couple pieces that are going to be loaners for somebody that give us some draft picks, because the Browns have drafted rather well recently, especially in that like end of day 2, beginning of day 3 type picks. So maybe you do move on and trade Zadarius Smith, get maybe a 3rd and a 7th from Detroit, right? Hypothetically, or some other team to, hey, you know what? We won. We're now at 3-6. Things seem interesting. We've got, what's their schedule look like after that? Then they've got New Orleans, Pittsburgh, Denver, Kansas City, Cincinnati, Miami, Baltimore. So that's the other thing, is I feel like similar to like when we talk about college football and we talk about quality of wins, if they really beat the Chargers, then that would be one thing. If they kind of sneak by and they're like, listen, we still have to play Detroit twice or Pittsburgh twice. We still have to play Kansas City. We still have to play, these teams. Like, what we just did is not going to be good enough to beat those. And maybe even a win doesn't move the needle for them into like, no, we're contenders. They're like, all right, maybe they still decide to blow things up. So it'll be interesting. Obviously, things will be a lot more clear. And by the time we're recording next week, the trade deadline will have come. And so we'll hopefully have some spicy trades to talk about. Maybe be able to do a little update on these few teams. And maybe even down the road, we sort of came up with our list of where we sort of put teams in, contenders that need to be buying right now, teams that are rebuilding, teams that we think should rebuild, and teams that would be rebuilding around 1 or 2 guys. And so maybe come the off season, we'll take some time to talk about those as well. Yeah.
Right. I feel kind of too about the Browns that like we didn't want to talk about it, but the Deshaun Watson injury, like if Deshaun was still healthy right now, and they had beat the Ravens anyway, they beat the Ravens with Deshaun.
Sure.
It's a close game, obviously. I still think there's a shot that they're still like feeling in full on sell mode. That like Jameis Winston, I feel like energy wise, feels kind of like a breath of fresh air, a big breath of energy kind of in for the Browns. Where even if Deshaun Watson had turned it around, I don't feel like they would have gotten reinvigorated the same way,
Right.
even to win. Where I feel like right now the Browns have that glimmer of hope that they're like, Jameis, he's fun, energetic, offense. That like a win doesn't always turn around teams with that glimmer.
Sure.
But a change in leadership can do that. That's why a head coach gets fired, new like coordinator gets moved up. That team can win right out of the gates typically. Like you'll see them a shocking win, and then they fall apart because they fired their coach, and like that's an issue. But that glimmer of hope for 1 week can seem to turn things around. And I feel like that's where the Browns were at, and we'll kind of be able to get that to see that movie in full effect this week.
Yeah. The other thing that I'm excited to see the rest of this year is, obviously Deshaun is done for the year, which means Jameis is the guy unless he gets hurt. I'd love to see what he does, and does he garner interest from, a team, say, like Las Vegas, who is definitely going to be drafting a quarterback, but hey, we're drafting Shedeur Sanders, but let's bring in Jameis Winston to sort of be that bridge guy while Shedeur learns a little bit, or Carolina, like, hey, we're taking a quarterback high this year. We're getting a Quinn Ewers, right? Whatever it is, but let's bring Jameis in to kind of help there. I could really see that this role for Jameis sort of turns him into the next Joe Flacco, where he's going to kind of bounce around, be that best backup that you have, and best backup behind a really young guy. And so we'll see. I've always loved Jameis. Him talking to the quarterbacks before the game in the tunnel is just so comedy. He's like playing for the names on the back of our jerseys and playing for the names on our helmets. Well, we don't have any decals. Just play for the Browns. It was so funny. It was so Jameis, man. So I hope things work out there. But Nick, it's been fun as always talking NFL. NBA season has started, which I promise we will talk about here, because it's here. I feel like we don't really know anything about the NBA until we hit like January and February anyway. But it's still fun to overreact and go back, maybe look at some of our takes during free agency about, hey, we thought this would really work and it's not, or hey, we didn't think this would work and it is. Maybe we'll do that here in the next couple of weeks. But as for Nick and myself, thank you all so much for watching, for supporting us, and have a great rest of your day.